Penuel the Black Pen. Earlier this year, I made a couple of videos trying to unpack the education system in South Africa, speaking about public schools, private schools, speaking about aspects of the curriculum, the teachers, etc. The videos were quite long, I think, and maybe not as engaging. I think what is important fundamentally is for this conversation to not be once off and for it to be ongoing. I'd made a video previously about maintenance, and I write about maintenance in my book, Parenting with Penwell, which you guys can get if you email penwellsbooks@gmail.com. Can get the ebook PDF for 50 Rand, can get a hard copy for 100 Rand, excluding postage. Outside of maintenance, two of the things that I mentioned was the fact that children's costs are mostly centered around schooling, school fees, and medical aid. Of which with medical aid, 90% of South Africans do not have medical aid. Only 10% of South Africans actually have medical aid, which means the vast majority of our country uses public healthcare, clinics, hospitals, and get medication basically from those facilities. From a schooling perspective, a lot of people don't know, and what I'd said in my video is that 67% of all our public schools are no-fee schools. I did some of the research and the number actually comes up to 87% currently. I also did some research to get some data that I think may be interesting to some of you who are maybe interested or curious about the schooling system in South Africa. This was taken from random articles on the internet. Please feel free to Google, feel free to go to the Department of Basic Education website and any other articles that you may find interesting. The development of no-fee school policies has resulted in an increase in learners who do not pay school fees from just 3% in 2006 to 65%. This was in 2014. Provincially, in 2014, 92% of learners in Limpopo and 82% of learners in the Eastern Cape attended no-fee schools in 2014. 92% in Limpopo, 82% in the Eastern Cape. While on the other hand, in the Western Cape, 41% of the learners were in no-fee schools, and in Gauteng, the number was 45%, students that weren't paying any school fees. Now, in 2019, these were some of the numbers. Learners benefiting from the no-fee school policy increased from 9.1 million in 2014 to 9.6 million in 2019. In 2019, there were 87% no-fee schools, which accommodate 80% of learners. No-fee schools, for those of you who may not know, are allocated a higher amount of state funding per learner as compared to fee-charging schools. The no-fee schools receive a budget of 1,390 Rand per learner in 2019. What's important for people to know is that our schools in this country, there's 25,000 of them, just rough number. They split up into 5 quintiles. Those quintiles are an aspect of the location they're in, income of the people in that community, the facilities and the resources. At the lowest end, quintile 1 are the poorest of the poorest schools, and at the highest end, quintile 5 are schools in the most affluent suburbs that you can find. So what has happened in our country is that these bottom 3 have kind of been bunched together, quintile 1 to 3, and all of them are now no-fee schools. That's the 87% of the 25,000 schools in this country where no school fees is expected to be paid by the parents. These 2 schools at the top, quintile 4 and 5, are the ones where people now charge school fees. And I want to highlight that in 1997 and all the way to maybe 2006 and a bit beyond, the quintile 1 to 3 were paying, or government was paying about 1,200 Rand per learner. Obviously in 2019, this had gone up to 1,400 Rand per learner per year, not per month, per year. That is the budget that government was giving. Of course, outside of that budget, the government also pays school teachers to teach at those schools. And then they also pay for the facilities as well. About 1,200 Rand per learner per year in quintile 1 to 3. And then for quintile 4, back in 97 to 2006, 590 Rand per learner per year. And then for quintile 5, 204 Rand per learner per year. What does this mean? You know, some people speak about government schools. I'll never send my child to a government school. You need to understand that government schools are different. As I said, there's 5 quintiles. But some of the top schools in this country, if not the best schools in this country, are government schools. If you think in Gauteng, for example, you have schools such as KES, King Edward School. You've got JP boys and JP girls. You've got Parktown boys, Parktown girls. Schools like Bryanston High. These are top schools in the nation. You go to KwaZulu, for example. You've got Peter Maritzburg College. You've got Peter Maritzburg Girls High. You've got Westville boys, Westville girls. I think you've got Northwood. You've got Durban Northlands College. Glenwood as examples of top public schools. In the Eastern Cape, you've got Selborne. You've got Clarendon, you've got Collegiate, you've got Grey High School, you've got Queenstown, Queen's College, sorry, you've got Dale College, you've got Graham College, you've got Victoria Girls. There's a lot of top public schools in the Eastern Cape. In the Western Cape, you've got schools like Westerford and I believe Sachs as well. These are top public schools. Grey College in Bloemfontein is a public school and one of the best schools on the African continent. And a lot of the Afrikaans schools, Waterkloof as an example, the Hoërskool Monument, schools such as Paul Gymnasium, for example, Afrikaans Macy's, Afrikaans Seuns. Those are public schools that are some of the top schools in the country, if not the continent. When people speak about private schools, those are schools that fall under an IEP program. There's a few of them that are normally popular, and those ones are normally extremely, extremely expensive. When you speak of a Hilton College that costs over 350,000 Rand a year, when you speak of a Michael House, when you speak of a Kearney College, which is the most expensive day scholar school in the country. You know, when you speak of a St. John's College, of a St. Stithians, when you speak of a St. Anne's, when you speak of a St. Andrew's Girls, when you speak of St. Andrew's Boys in Grahamstown, or a DSG, or Bishop's Diocesan in the Western Cape, these are private schools and they're normally very expensive. There's been a rollout of a lot of private schools in the past, Sparks being one of them, of course the more popular one being Curo. You've obviously got other brands such as Redham, Red Hill, and other known brands out there, but Curo is probably the most popular. And Curo schools start from 23,000 last I checked, all the way to 110,000, depending on if it's some of the private schools in townships or more poorer areas, or some of the more expensive aspects of their private schooling that are out there. But generally with private schools, you're probably looking at 40,000, 50,000 Rand a year, 60,000 Rand even. So for some of these schools that are up there, Pretoria Boys High, which I believe is the most expensive public school in the country, you look at Rondebosch in the Western Cape, and then you look at KES, schools like Grey High School, for example. These schools are above 50,000, 60,000 Rand a year, which is unreal. But these are public schools. These are not private schools. So it's very important for us to be able to separate and differentiate between the different levels. 87% of our schools are no-fee schools, quintile 1 to 3. And then quintile 4 and 5, to what I was alluding to. If government is giving a school 200 Rand or 590 Rand per year, but you find that that school fees is 20,000, 30,000 Rand a year, that money is negligible. The school doesn't even need it. They can tell government to actually keep that money. Imagine paying 40,000 Rand a year school fees, and then someone says, but this is a public school. And you're like, as much as it's a public school, it's a quintile 4 or 5. Which means government only subsidizes 590 Rand or 204 Rand for my child. The rest of the 40,000, the rest of the 30,000 is me. And what happens with the school fees, of course, is it allows the schools to go and get more teachers, get more ground staff, build better facilities. If you think of some of the top schools that I mentioned around the country, if you look at their sporting facilities, they have state-of-the-art science laboratories. They've got indoor heated swimming pools. Fascinating. And then when you look at the breakdown, for example, of something called a learner to educator ratio, the LER, for private schools, it's between 15 to 25, sometimes to 30 learners per teacher. So obviously private schools love selling this because they're like, your child will get more attention, you know, unlike crowded public schools. The average private schools, 15 to 25 students in a class. The average public schools, on the other hand, you're looking at about 30 to 35. Sometimes the difference is not even that major. There are Curo schools, for example, which have a classroom with 30 students. Similarly, public schools, like I said, have got 30 students to 35 on average. It may be that some schools maybe go all the way to 40 students in a classroom, but I know government is constantly working on that. Private schools make up less than 5% of all the schools in South Africa, with just over 500,000 students that are in private education out of a total learner population of 12.4 million. We've got 12.4 million learners in basic education. That's grade 1 to grade 12. 12.4 million, and only 500,000 are in private schooling. What's also important to know is that of these 12 million, 9 million of them eat at school. There's something called the National School Nutrition Program, which is the government program that provides at least one nutritious meal to all learners in poorer primary and secondary schools. These are the schools in quintile 1 to 3. So those kids get fed as well. 9 million of the 12 million kids get fed at these schools. I think that was very important for me to highlight for people to know, because a lot of people obviously start thinking, how much should I pay for school fees? Where should I send my kids? I want to send my kids to private school. And again, tying into what I was saying about maintenance, a lot of people don't know the numbers of this country, and a lot of people are living beyond their means. Almost everyone in this country is sending their kids to public schools. 95% of our schools are public schools. And then number two, 87% of those schools are free, because people don't have money in this country. And even people that have jobs, the average is 3,500. Some earn 5,000, and the top 10% earns just over 7,000 Rand. So if you're paying higher school fees than, let's say, 100 Rand to 500 Rand to 1,000 Rand per month, please know that you are part of the privileged elite in this country. Another thing that I think is very important to highlight, and for me, this is a conversation that the Department of Basic Education needs to have with the rest of the South African population, is schools that are charging above, I would say, 15,000 Rand a year. 15,000 Rand a year in school fees, I think, need to be removed from this public schooling bracket. I think some of these schools that are in quintile 4 and 5 need to be completely removed from the government's ambit. This low budget that they get and the money that's obviously paid to some of the teachers, I think, is highly negligible. And I think those schools can move into the private space. They can then choose from there if they want to use the IEP program or if they want to use the CAPS curriculum as an example. But from 15,000 up, it doesn't make sense to be calling yourself a public school. Like I said, you've got Pretoria Boys, Cares, Rondebosch, Grey PE, schools like Westville that are charging 50, 60,000 Rand a year, which is more expensive than the average private school even. And these are brilliant, brilliant, brilliant schools where some of the leaders of this country come from. Never mind the top Afrikaans schools that I'd mentioned as well. Just some interesting knowledge for you guys to know, especially as parents thinking about this whole having a child thing, how much children cost, etc. I think these are more conversations we probably need to have in a group setting, and I'm going to try and make sure that I'm traveling around the country to meet with a lot of you, to have some of these very, very important conversations, to also make sure that you're not swimming in debt and it's strangling you, making sure that when you're chasing your child's father, your child's mother, to contribute to your child, you have perspective on where things sit, and you don't feel like, oh my gosh, we're not living up to the Joneses. The Joneses in this country are actually struggling and are sending their kids to free public schools. Penuel the Black Pen, very important conversation, and I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts around this. Cheers.